We've loved the new Yamaha R15 ever since we first rode it at the racetrack earlier this year. But along with all that added performance and technology comes a fair increase in price, and this bike now costs exactly the same as the bigger and more powerful Bajaj RS200. So today, we've got a sporty Yamaha going head to head with a sporty Bajaj. Should be fun! And you know it's going to be an especially fun time the moment you set eyes on both these bikes. Fully fed and raring to go, both machines make it plainly obvious that they're designed for speed and excitement. But the new R15 takes us to the next level, and its ravishing style is heavily inspired by the bigger R6 and R1 superbikes from Yamaha's stable. Every angle on this bike is sleek and striking, and we're especially fond of that tail section. In person, the new R15 also looks bigger than before, and it's an assured head turner in traffic. And when you pay closer attention, details like the fully digital screen and high quality switchgear make it feel more modern and premium than the Pulsar. But there's no denying the fact that while this bike is still relatively well put together, the impression of quality in the materials and finish isn't as high as it used to be on the previous generation models. The Pulsar's design, on the other hand, is now familiar, but the design is still quite literally in your face. The shock factor of the design continues when you move away from the face and over to the side, where you'll discover a large fairing with an excess of angles, creases, and vents, as well as a multitude of surface finishes. The quirkiness continues at the rear thanks to, well, let's call them unique tail lamps. Build quality hasn't been a Pulsar RS strong point, and the previous bikes we've ridden were prone to rattles emerging from the fairing. But Bajaj is known to actively work on improving its products over time, and we're happy to report that this particular motorcycle held together well. Scoring a thorough win for the Pulsar are its halogen projector headlamps, which may not sound as exotic as the R15's full LED units, but they perform significantly better once the sun goes down. It's no competition really. The Pulsar, it's striking, but it's also very polarizing. The R15, meanwhile, well, this is one of the best looking motorcycles on sale today. With the visuals out of the way, let's dive into the next area of contrast between these two motorcycles. One of the biggest differences in the feel of these two motorcycles is how you sit on them. The Pulsar has a surprisingly comfortable riding position, which is sporty but not very committed, and you could sit like this for hours without discomfort. The R15, on the other hand, is convinced that it's a miniature race bike, and it puts you in one of the most committed riding positions of any affordable sport bike on the market. Going beyond the riding position, the R15's seat is also set slightly taller than the Pulsar's, and it's not as wide or accommodating either. The same applies to the pillion seat, and while neither is excellent, the Pulsar's is a little more practical. But these are entry-level sport bikes we're talking about, and practicality takes a backseat in favor of engine performance. Happily, both motors are impressive and they match the role well. They also have a number of similarities on paper, and both bikes have fuel-injected 4-valve engines that are liquid-cooled. But there are some differences here too. The R15, for example, is India's first small-capacity motorcycle to feature a variable valve actuation system that brings in a more aggressive cam profile above 7,400 RPM. Now this allows for a stronger top end without sacrificing on the mid-range. The R15 also gets a slipper clutch now, which is a pleasure to use, and it allows you to hammer in aggressive downshifts without upsetting the rear tire. On the other hand, the RS200's KTM-derived motor features Bajaj's trademark triple spark plug design. It also boasts an extra 44cc over the R15, which allows it to squeeze out nearly 25 horsepower, where the Yamaha makes just over 19. The Pulsar also makes a good deal more torque, and both figures peak at lower revs on the Pulsar than the R15. And this means that the Bajaj engine just doesn't have to work as hard. The Pulsar's motor also produces a raspy and angry exhaust note at higher revs. That's definitely more exciting than the rather conventional sounding Yamaha. That the Bajaj RS200 is the faster bike here is without question. But the R15, quite predictably, is more efficient. The weather's been miserable all day, but the smiles never stopped coming, and a big reason for that is the engines on both these bikes. The R15 with its new VVA technology has grown a stronger mid-range than before, and it keeps its thrilling top end. The Pulsar meanwhile, this engine is stronger throughout. It's got a punchy mid-range and it's very happy to rev from 7,000 RPM all the way to the 10,000 RPM red line. This is also the first time I'm riding a BS4 spec Pulsar, and I have to say there's a noticeable improvement in the refinement. The engine feels much tighter and it sounds less rattly. The similarities continue under the skin, and both bikes feature a perimeter style frame, which is something you generally see on bigger sport bikes. A telescopic fork and a monoshock is standard on both, but only the Bajaj offers preload adjustability for the monoshock. Now, a non-adjustable shock is a surprise on a bike as sporty as the R15, but the Yamaha setup is actually very well judged. For a bike that looks this sporty, the Yamaha suspension absorbs bumps really well, and that's especially surprising given how eager this bike is to corner hard. Hop off the R15 and the Pulsar's stiffer suspension is immediately apparent. Now, the RS200 is certainly not uncomfortable, but it's not soft and supple either. Nevertheless, the R15 is still considerably less comfortable whether you're commuting or touring, and that's all thanks to its heavily committed riding position. Overall, the RS200 is an engaging handler as well, but there's no doubt that this is a bigger and heavier motorcycle, and a glance at the spec sheet will reveal that it weighs a whole 25 kilos more than the R15. The R15's relative lack of weight gives it super agile responses in the corners that the Pulsar simply can't match. But the Pulsar is no slouch either, and it makes up for it with a stable and encouraging feel. Now, today's a soaking wet day, but we have ridden both these motorcycles in the dry on the racetrack, and they're both capable and very enjoyable in their own right. Both these motorcycles run on MRF Nylon Grip Sapper tires, and despite the fact that they aren't radials, they handle these conditions quite well. Naturally, these are not super sticky track tires, but we were able to ride with a good degree of confidence, and the tires weren't a cause for concern. Still, if you want more grip, Yamaha will also sell you an optional Metzeler M5 rear tire, which our test bike was wearing. Sadly, there's no option for a Metzeler front, since the company doesn't make a tire in that size. In terms of braking, both bikes perform quite well, with slightly higher levels of lever consistency from the Pulsar. The Bajaj also offers optional single-channel ABS, although it's an expensive proposition that costs a further 12,000 rupees. But then again, the Yamaha doesn't offer this option at all, and that's really disappointing. At the end of the day, the R15 is sensational to look at, and it's just lovely to ride when you're on roads like these. But then again, it lacks the Pulsar's effortless turn of pace in normal riding conditions, and the riding position is something you want to consider carefully as well. Now, I won't call it a negative because it's part of the character of the motorcycle, but it does mean that you better have a strong set of core muscles and a healthy back to live with this bike on a daily basis. But the Pulsar is far more usable. The fact that this motorcycle has stronger and more accessible performance across the rev range is only part of the allure. What really appeals about this bike is that it's more capable across a wider range of applications like touring, but especially commuting. If you don't mind the looks, the RS200 makes for fantastic value, and it is the deserving pick of these two.